I'm a single mom. I never knew who the donor was. Now there's something very wrong with my son. It all started when I got divorced at the age of 39, and was left with a choice: return to the dating circuit, as my single girlfriends would jokingly refer to it, and take my chances on finding a man ready to jump right into having a family, or explore alternative means of having a child. On my own. The very sound of it terrified me. But when I thought about starting a relationship all over again after 10 long years of trying to salvage one, going it alone didn't sound so bad. And so, the next day, I began looking into artificial insemination by way of an anonymous sperm donation. A week after that, I was at a fertility clinic, looking through a database containing profiles of potential anonymous donors and making arrangements for a procedure. A month after that, I was pregnant. And 9 months after that, I was giving birth to my beautiful baby boy, David. And while I didn't know who David's biological father was, it didn't matter. I was his mother. He was my son, and we were in it together. That is, until almost 7 years later, when I received a call from an unknown number that would change my life forever. "Hello?" I answered. "Is this Mary Birch?" a man asked on the other line. "Yes, this is she," I replied, prepared to hang up at the earliest sign of spam risk. The same Mary Birch who received an artificial insemination from an anonymous sperm donor 7 years ago tomorrow? Fuck. I thought to myself, assuming that after all these years, the anonymous donor himself had suddenly come looking for me. Or worse. "David, this is Ryan McDonald. I was a nurse at the fertility clinic where you chose your anonymous donor and underwent your procedure." "Okay," I replied, unsure of where he was going with it. "Mary, I'm not sure exactly how to tell you this, but there's something you need to know about David." "What?" "And I need to tell you before tomorrow." Later that night, I was sitting at a diner, texting David's babysitter his dietary restrictions, while at the same time researching where to rent a bouncy house for his 7th birthday the next day, when Ryan McDonald sat down in the booth across from me. He didn't look familiar, but in my defense, it had been almost 7 years, and it wasn't like I ever got to know any of the countless nurses I had met during the process. "This is going to be difficult to hear," Ryan began, before taking a deep breath, "but David isn't the only child conceived using his biological father's sperm." "Fair enough. I always knew there was a chance that there were others out there," I replied, relieved to hear what I assumed was why he brought me there. But my assumption was very wrong. "Yeah, but the thing is," he added, before hesitating, and then leaning in to whisper to me, "the others, there's something very wrong with them." "Oh, well, I guess I lucked out then," I said defensively, "'cause David is the most level-headed child. I honestly couldn't have asked for a more well-behaved kid." "See, that's the thing," Ryan continued, "so were they, until their 7th birthdays." "7th birthdays? Well, what happened then?" "They turned into what?" "Killers." I stopped for a minute and went completely silent, as he looked at me sympathetically, until I suddenly burst out laughing. "Killers? That's a good one. Hold on," I called out, as I looked around the diner. "Where are the hidden cameras?" "You're pranking me, right?" "I'm afraid not, Mary." That's when he pulled out the newspaper clippings. There were 9 stories in total, about 9 different children, each one having either gone on a killing spree, or attempted to, just after turning 7 years old. And, according to Ryan, each one a child of the donor, as he kept referring to him. David, from what we know, is the 10th, and final child, he concluded, as he put the clippings back in his pocket. The whole thing was also overdramatic, so far-fetched, and so disrespectful to both me and my son, that whatever amusement I was finding in it, had long faded away. Instead, it was actually starting to piss me off. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. McDonald, I better be going. I'm afraid your joke has gone a little too far," I declared with a scowl, as I grabbed my purse and stormed away. "Wait," he called out. "We need to talk about the donor." But I'd already made up my mind. By the time I got home, David was fast asleep in his bedroom, and the babysitter was anxiously waiting to leave. After handing her some cash and heading upstairs, I got ready for bed, and put on some reality TV, to help get my mind off the bizarre and unsettling encounter at the diner. But when the clock struck midnight, and it officially became David's 7th birthday, I couldn't help but be reminded of Ryan's warning. "See, that's the thing, so were they, until their 7th birthdays. Don't worry about it. It's just a bunch of nonsense," I whispered to myself, as I pulled the comforter over my head, shut off the light, and turned in for the night. But just as I was falling asleep, I was suddenly awoken by a strange noise emanating from the hallway, specifically David's bedroom. Cracking the door and tiptoeing down the hall, I slowly approached it. And as I got closer, and closer, and closer, the noise grew louder, and louder, and louder, until I reached the door to David's room, and was able to hear the sound more clearly. It was a growling noise, accented by what sounded like howling and drooling. Surely, Ryan was right, and there was, in fact, something wrong with David. I thought to myself, terrified by what might have come over him. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place, not knowing what to do, until I eventually worked up the courage to grab the doorknob and fling open the door, to find David curled up in bed, watching a horror movie, its hero on the verge of being devoured by a zombie. Phew, I thought to myself, realizing that the film was the source of the unsettling sounds that I'd heard, before my relief turned to anger. "David, what are you doing? It's way past your bedtime." "Sorry, Mom," my son replied, looking even more scared than the movie's main character, and than I had just been, as he scrambled to find the clicker and turn off the TV. Then I remembered that it was David's birthday, and suddenly felt bad, so I decided to let him watch TV until the movie ended, under one condition: that he be on his best behavior at his birthday party the next day. But despite our agreement, when David's 7th birthday party commenced in our backyard the next day, something came over him that I'd never seen before. A strange irritability, a temper that, had I not seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed he was capable of. Seemingly out of nowhere, after showing his friend Bobby one of his birthday gifts, he suddenly snatched it back and yelled, "Give it back. It's not yours, it's mine," before shoving him to the ground. "David!" I screamed, as Bobby's eyes welled up, and the other moms looked on in surprise. "That's enough. Now get inside and go to your room, until I say otherwise." "But Mom," he cried back. I said go. Now, I insisted, but rather than continue to argue, his face suddenly turned blank and he simply walked back inside. "Are you okay, Bobby?" I asked his friend, who had just picked himself up off the ground, and appeared to be fine, before turning to Bobby's mother, Roxy. "I am so sorry about that. I have no idea what's gotten into him." But Roxy didn't say anything. She just stood there, silently, her mouth agape and her eyes wide in fear, as she looked over my shoulder. I turned around, to find David, standing at the door to the backyard, holding a steak knife. "David!" I began to scold him, but he had already come charging at me, as the rest of the partygoers cried out in horror. Now it's important to know why my husband had left so many years ago. Truth is, he had a terrible temper, and was prone to psychological and emotional abuse. He had never laid a finger on me, until one day, when, in the middle of a fight, he seemingly out of nowhere, picked up a kitchen knife and threatened to use it on me. Suffice to say, a month later, we had filed for divorce. Which is why, in that moment, as my child held one of his own, repeating history, I simply froze, as he grew closer, and closer, and closer, raising his weapon in the air, ready to strike. But before he was able to bring the knife down on me, suddenly a hand emerged out of nowhere and caught his arm, freezing his blade in midair, just an inch from my face. And when I turned to investigate who had saved me from my child, I saw Ryan McDonald standing there, a look of sorrow in his eyes, as if to say, "Told you so." But all he said was, "We have to talk about the donor."